Renu Rana Rana.
On this occasion I will convey the history of Mark Antony. Marcus Antonius was a Roman general and statesman best known for his love affair with Cleopatra VII of Egypt. As Julius Caesar's friend and right-hand man, he gave the funeral oration after Caesar's assassination which turned the tide of popular opinion against the assassins. As part of the second triumvirate of Rome, he ruled uneasily with Octavian Caesar, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus famously fell in love with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, and, after his defeat at the Battle of Actium, committed suicide in 30 BCE. With no other contenders for power, Octavian became Rome's first emperor as Augustus Caesar, and the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire. Antony was born January 14, 83 BCE to Marcus Antonius Creticus and Julia of the Caesars, Julius Caesar's cousin. He was instructed in rhetoric by his mother and grandmother, Julia Minor, and, by all accounts, was given to education and philosophy in particular, until he became friends with the young Publius Clodius Pulcher and another young man named Curio. This sum of 250 talents would be the equivalent of $5 million today, and this he owed before the age of 20. Dodging his creditors, Antony slipped away to Greece, where he spent his time studying oratory and military exercises. He was persuaded by the Roman general Aulus Gabinius to join an expedition against Syria, in which Antony proved an able commander of cavalry, and then continued on with Gabinius to put down revolts against Ptolemy XII in Egypt. At this time he may have first met his later wife, Cleopatra VII, who would have been about 14 years old. Rising quickly to prominence in Gabinius' ranks, Antony was promoted and called by Julius Caesar to join his forces in Gaul in 54 BCE. Here, as in the East, Antony proved himself a brilliant commander, but his appetite for luxury, drink and sexual excesses alienated him from Caesar and the other officers. The common soldiers, however, embraced Antony. In spite of his hedonism, Antony continued to be of great assistance to Caesar in the conquest of Gaul, and, in 50 BCE, Caesar supported Antony in his election as tribune. In the Senate, Antony was a fierce supporter of Caesar's policies. Antony's longtime friend, Curio, had moved away from the aristocratic party and aligned himself with Caesar's populist party, using his eloquence in oratory to convince others to do the same. Antony and Curio faced constant frustration and rejection by the Senate in anything having to do with Caesar, and, in 49 BCE, they fled Rome for Gaul and Caesar's camp, dressed as servants, to inform him of how he and his supporters were being treated at Rome. Caesar took this affront to the young tribune and the orator as his excuse to march on Rome in defiance of the Senate's orders, instigated by Pompey the Great, that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. After taking Rome without a fight, Caesar turned his attention to Pompey's forces in Spain and left Antony to rule the city. Though an effective military leader, Antony had little skill as a politician. Plutarch states, Euro was too lazy to pay attention to the complaints of persons who were injured, he listened impatiently to petitions, and he had an ill name for familiarity with other people's wives. Euro. Following the battle, Caesar followed the fleeing Pompey to Egypt, and Antony returned to Rome, where he neglected his administrative duties regularly to the point of bringing disgrace upon Caesar's newly won rule. As a result, Antony was removed from his position upon Caesar's return from the east, and power conferred upon Lepidus. 2 years later, however, Antony was again a part of Caesar's close circle. In 44 BCE, after Caesar's assassination, Antony took the opportunity as speaker at the dictator's funeral to turn the tide of popular opinion against the conspirators and drive them from Rome. Antony seems to have had no intention of pursuing or punishing Caesar's assassins until the appearance in Rome of Caesar's 19-year-old heir, Gaius Octavius Thurinus, who demanded the assassins be brought to justice. Octavian's arrival, and legal claim as Caesar's heir, was an unpleasant development for Antony, and the two men were instantly at odds with each other. Octavian insisted that Caesar's will be followed to the letter, including dispensing the monies which were to be given to the people of Rome. Antony disagreed with this, as he also took offense at a boy, as Antony would frequently call Octavian, offering him advice on anything. Outmaneuvered by Octavian politically and intellectually, Antony fled with his legions to Gaul, where his forces were defeated by Octavian's. At a truce, Antony, Octavian and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE and agreed to partitioning Rome's holdings among them to rule jointly. Lepidus was given Africa to rule, Octavian the west, from Rome, and Antony the east. After defeating the armies of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Octavian returned to Rome and Antony went east, where, at Tarsus in 41 BCE, he summoned the Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII to appear before him. He planned on charging Cleopatra with sedition against Rome in order to fine her a substantial sum to help pay his army. Cleopatra, however, manipulated her entrance to Tarsus in such a way that she immediately cast a spell over Antony which he would never be able to break. Antony and Cleopatra immediately began their famous love affair, and he considered her his wife even before legally marrying her. In 40 BCE, Fulvia died and, in an effort to try to cement the further deteriorating relationship between the two rulers, Octavian and Antony agreed that Antony would marry Octavian's sister, Octavia. The relationship between Octavian and Antony deteriorated further as the years passed, and Antony continued his relationship with Cleopatra while married to Octavia. In 37 BCE, Antony sent Octavia back to Rome, and, in 35 BCE, when Octavia came with troops, supplies, and funds to meet Antony in Athens, he refused to meet her and had her again sent home. Leaving Athens on campaign, Antony successfully subdued and annexed Armenia to Rome. Instead of returning to the city of Rome for his triumph, however, Antony held his parade and celebration in Alexandria with Cleopatra at his side. He formally ceded territories to Cleopatra and their children and proclaimed Caesar Ion the true, legitimate heir to Caesar, thus publicly challenging Octavian's claim and right to rule. Octavian, acting swiftly as usual, read a document in the Senate, allegedly Antony's will, which, he claimed, proved Antony was preparing to take over Rome and which gave away precious Roman resources to Cleopatra and her children. Wisely deciding to avoid declaring war on Antony, Octavian manipulated the Senate into declaring war on Cleopatra. The forces of Antony and Cleopatra met those of Octavian, under the leadership of the general Agrippa, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where they were defeated by Agrippa's superior tactics and their own ineptness at waging war on the sea. For the next year, Antony would fight a series of small, feudal battles with Octavian until, in 30 BCE, upon hearing that Cleopatra was dead, he stabbed himself. The rumor was false, however, and, dying, he was brought to Cleopatra, where he died in her arms. She killed herself shortly afterwards through poison. Octavian had Caesar's and Cleopatra's son, Caesar Ion, strangled to death. The children of Antony and Cleopatra were brought to Rome, where, after being paraded behind an effigy of their mother in Octavian's triumph, they were raised by Octavia along with her own children by Antony, one of which, Antonia Major, would later be grandmother of the Emperor Nero. Octavian was now the sole power of Rome and, in 27 BCE, was given the title Augustus, becoming the first emperor of the Roman Empire. That's the history that I can convey this time. I hope it's useful. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe.